You know what that feeling when you're dealing with someone and their reaction is just so completely out of proportion? It leaves you wondering are they just losing control or are they secretly trying to control me? Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a fascinating and honestly super common behavioral puzzle. We're going to walk that really fine line between someone who is genuinely struggling to manage their feelings and someone who is actively weaponizing their behavior to pull your strings. It's the classic showdown, a lack of control versus a desire for absolute control. To keep us on track, here is our agenda. Section 1, Emotional Dysregulation Explained. Section 2, The Mechanics of Manipulation. Section 3, Intent versus Inability. Section 4, Impact on Relationships. And finally, Section 5, Treatments and Counters. We'll break down the heavy concepts first and then bring it all together.
All right, Section 1, Emotional Dysregulation Explained. Let's look at what actually happens when the brain's emotional brakes just completely fail. So here is the absolutely crucial takeaway. Emotional dysregulation is fundamentally an inability. It results in emotional reactions that are incredibly intense, they last way too long, and they just don't match up with social norms for whatever triggered them. Now, this isn't just someone throwing a tantrum to get their way. No way. Science shows us it's often linked to physical or developmental factors, things like brain injuries, psychological trauma, or neurodevelopmental disorders like ADHD. Achieving emotional equilibrium is just incredibly difficult for them. Think of it like a car driving down a steep hill where the brakes have suddenly been cut. The driver isn't speeding on purpose. Their prefrontal regulatory regions are genuinely overwhelmed.
You can really see this take root in childhood. When kids face emotional environments they just can't process, maybe due to ignored needs or trauma, they usually split down one of two paths. They might internalize. It's like they become a tightly sealed jar, bottling up the storm, having a brutally hard time calling down and just avoiding negative emotions altogether. Or they externalize. They act out with extreme emotions, impulsivity, and a pretty obvious inability to read social cues. Okay, Section 2, The Mechanics of Manipulation. Let's shift gears and see how this paints a totally different picture of our interpersonal dynamics. In stark contrast to the inability we were just talking about, psychological manipulation is fundamentally deliberate. It's an action carefully designed to influence or control someone else in a subtle, underhanded way to get exactly what they want. It is dishonest, it's exploitative, and the manipulator knows exactly what they're doing to further their own personal aims. Look, we have to draw a hard line here between persuasion and manipulation. Persuasion is harmless. You're trying to move someone toward a desired action, sure, but you completely respect their right to say no. Manipulation, that's about exploiting someone's vulnerabilities. It's underhanded, it's unduly coercive, and it relies on hidden influence to essentially strip away the other person's free will. Researchers have pinpointed some of the most common manipulation tactics, and honestly, the range here is wild. It might start off deceptively sweet, superficial charm, showering you with praise. But if that doesn't work, they pivot. You get the silent treatment or straight-up coercion and emotional blackmail. They'll lie, either by making things up or conveniently omitting the truth. They'll use gaslighting to make you literally question your own sanity. And they are masters of diversion, constantly steering the conversation away from their own accountability. Psychology author George K. Simon hit the nail on the head with this one. He notes that successful manipulation primarily involves concealing aggressive intentions, knowing the victim's psychological vulnerabilities, and, this is key, having a sufficient level of ruthlessness. They have to be completely willing to cause harm without letting guilt get in the way. It's chillingly calculated. Which brings us to Section 3, Intent versus Inability. This is the real intersection of our explainer. How do we actually tell the difference between a calculated strategy and a desperate struggle? Let's anchor ourselves to this one core difference. It is huge. Emotional dysregulation is a vulnerability. The person is overwhelmed, their actions are largely unintentional, and their frantic goal is just to find some emotional stability. Manipulation, on the other hand, is a strategy. It's calculated, the actions are entirely deliberate, and the end goal is strictly about gaining control over you. When we lay out the clinical drivers side by side, the differences are massive. With ADHD, the primary feature is dysregulation, driven purely by neurological deficits in the prefrontal regulatory regions. Contrast that with antisocial or narcissistic personality disorders, where manipulation is the primary feature, driven by a lack of empathy, deceits, or a deep belief of superiority.
But then you have borderline personality disorder, or BPD, where there's a lot of overlap and intense affective instability. This is where the lines get really blurry for a lot of people. Luckily, leading expert Dr. Marcia M. Linehan clears this right up. She explains that behaviors in BPD often appear manipulative, but they're actually unthinking manifestations of intense pain. They are not deliberate enough to be considered truly manipulative. It's a frantic attempt to survive a wildly unstable internal state, not some master plan to control you. Section 4, Impact on Relationships. So what actually happens when these powerful behavioral forces collide with the people we love? Well, even though dysregulation isn't malicious, the collateral damage is exhausting. It takes a massive toll. We're talking intense relationship anxiety, a really poor ability to set and keep boundaries. You end up having these frequent, super damaging arguments. And there's this heavy preoccupation with loneliness, which often leads to support-seeking behaviors that can feel incredibly clinging or smothering to a partner. But the impact of manipulation, that is entirely toxic by design. It systematically leads to a loss of your autonomy, it forces emotional blackmail, and causes deep psychological harm, entirely at the expense of the victim. Finally, Section 5, Treatments and Counters. Let's focus on some actionable hope and defensive strategies. For anyone out there struggling with emotional dysregulation, clinical science has some very clear pathways to healing. Step 1 is often cognitive behavioral therapy to challenge those ingrained thought patterns. Step 2 is dialectical behavior therapy, which is really the gold standard here. And Step 3 might involve EMDR to help process deep underlying trauma. Dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, is a real game changer. Its entire focus is on promoting mindfulness and embracing dialectics, basically teaching the brain to hold two opposing truths at once, like I am hurting and I can choose to respond calmly. It stresses the importance of validation and helps people build healthy behavioral habits. It literally teaches you to put mindful space between a trigger and your emotional response. Now, if you're trying to defend against a true manipulator, your strategy is totally different. You have to eliminate the vulnerabilities they exploit. That means learning to identify their tactics in real time, like spotting gaslighting or diversion the second it happens. You need to reduce your dependency on them, overcome excessive trust, recognize their rationalizations for what they are, and above all, set incredibly firm, ironclad personal boundaries. So I'm going to leave you with this question to chew on long after this explainer wraps up. If our most destructive actions can stem from either a complete lack of control or a ruthless desire for absolute control, how might recognizing this difference fundamentally change the way we judge the people in our lives? Understanding the why behind the behavior is the first true step toward protecting yourself and extending genuine help to those who truly need it. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. Keep learning and stay curious.